Right, to get started, I'm just going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, Chris Pettit. I'm the fund head of Ingenious Play, which is our new games fund at Ingenious. Quick introduction to Ingenious, been around 20 years, one of the largest investors in the creative industries in the UK. We've invested about £8 billion over the 20-year period, primarily into film and television. We've had various investments in games over the years, and my months has been to develop a new investment strategy for our games sector.
Hi, I'm Harry. I'm part of the media team at Ox Capital. We're a venture capital firm with 20 years experience kind of like building businesses. So we have three kind of main strategic areas. We have tech venture capital, where we're the third most active early stage investor around the kind of seed series A level. We have infrastructure, where we invest into solar and wind farms, as well as real estate, and then also media, which is our kind of newest investment strategy. And we have a £10 million film fund that we have now deployed, and we're now looking at TV and games opportunities.
Hi, I'm Adam Betteridge from Authentic Media Group. We specialize in consultancy services to a number of different funds working across the creative industries. I've worked in the film industry for about 20 years now, and it's interesting to be one of the film funds moving across to games, because actually we've been working in games for about 4 years now. And have worked on a number of transactions which, such as the provision of debt, so velocity capital, accelerating tax credit payments, as well as ad and app store revenues, and also work with a number of investors and funds on SEIS and EIS fundraising, so equity fundraising.
Romanos. I also do consulting. I work a lot with Adam and various of the investors that have been here this week, today even. So I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, then I'll open it up. So if anyone does have questions, just feel free to put your hand up. So let's get started. Why are film finances going into games? What is it that's made that transition happen? Do you want to go first? Go for it.
Sure. Why not? I suppose is the main question. Why haven't they sooner? It's probably another one. I think, it's fair to say that investing in the creative industries generally is quite similar. I think there are similarities about working and bridging the gap between financing and creativity that certain investors have become very experienced at over the last 20 years, like Ingenious. And I guess when I joined Ingenious 18 months ago, I was surprised that it hadn't invested in the game sector for the last 10 years. So I think there are natural synergies between working with creatives across all industries. And I think if you structure them in the right way, you can harness that in the video game sector. And I think what we're focusing our main attention on the game side is to use all the skills we've learned and employ those same strategies as we help build the companies we're investing into.
And I think also to add on to that, I mean, it's a great point about kind of creativity and IP, having a greater understanding about that, and IP being more fungible than ever, that we have that expertise and kind of coming over the different domains from kind of film to games. But then kind of moving beyond that also, it's a matter of market size, and we are VCs, and therefore finance does drive the kind of our salaries at the end of the day. And so with games now, the games market is now bigger than TV and video, and there was the kind of like latest report. And so there is an element of there being the rapidly expanding market, but then also fantastic new opportunities that have been built out from the UK, and that I think the UK is very well placed to perform on the world stage. I think that relative to any other sector, I think the UK is best place to have kind of the next big gaming company. So, I'm really excited about the opportunity there.
There's not so much I can add to what's already been said, except maybe to mention some of the challenges that the industry, such as the domination of Netflix, has quite massively changed the traditional method by which many financiers and many producers will go about investing in creating films. So amongst those challenges, it's kind of forcing people that would traditionally invest in an industry that they very well understand to see that at the moment kind of go through various changes, which means that they no longer understand it quite as clear as they once did, and so are now in a position that they're looking beyond the film industry, at a number of other creative industries. And I think the video games industry is doing a fantastic job presenting itself to the world currently. A lot of growth, a lot of excitement. And so that is a very clear target, I think, amongst a number of organizations that would have traditionally invested in films.
And what are the good, or maybe not so good, aspects of, from a developer's point of view, of film finances coming into games?
I mean, I think we slightly touched upon this with our answer to the previous question, but I think there's definitely an element of there being a divide between kind of the tech VCs who are coming or have previously invested into scalable businesses where you have negative unit economics, but you have that kind of one product that you're gunning for, and once it reaches scale, that it's positive. Whereas on the other hand, you have kind of like content generating companies and it being more hit-driven business, and from like kind of us coming from, I think we definitely understand that, and that we can have the patience to actually achieve the right content and to introduce them to our network of creatives, but then also have the patience and have the advice, honestly, about kind of where the company's going and what content we want to kind of put out there, really.
Yeah, and I think patience is the key, isn't it? So from a Ingenious Play perspective, we're looking at investing over a 5-year period minimum. So I think it's about giving those creative management teams the ability to breathe, to recognize what their business strategy is, and to work with them over an extended period of time to help build those businesses.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? I missed the beginning.
I was just asking, what are the good or maybe not so good aspects from a developer's point of view of film finances coming into the industry?
The good and not so good.
Good or not so good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the benefits certainly is that film financiers, film funds, do have extensive networks of investors. They're very used to working with high net worth individuals. So, their network, if nothing else, is something that would be a pleasure, I think, for a lot of people to be introduced to. Saying that, there are going to be some adjustments that people are going to need to help film funds make, because the way in which, and we might touch on this in a moment, the way in which film financiers traditionally invest, it tends to be more project-based rather than VC. So and I've already been in a number of discussions where film funds are kind of sort of slightly struggling to adjust to this kind of new way of being.
I mean, I'd just like to add, as in that's completely true, although we're now kind of more up to date and you don't have to educate us necessarily on the content play, there is also, there are film funds who, previously it's been kind of more project finance based, as Adam was saying, that there have been kind of SPVs, and therefore the mindset of a lot of financiers has been kind of short term, and therefore they're coming across to equity finance and they might think in a similar way, and ultimately it's up to them and it's up to you in order to educate them and saying, no, look, this is a long-term investment. You're going to be on our board for the next 5, maybe 10 years, and that's kind of, I think in the 1970s or 80s, that was the average length of a marriage. So it's just think about it in that way, that we're going to be there for a long time, and therefore you need to, and we need to provide kind of sufficient value add that we can advise you, that we can kind of be with you through those times, helping you scale that business, but then also producing great content. And that's kind of what we're all about, because that's why we're here.
I think one of the biggest advantages actually is probably the fact that most of the creative people that I've worked with over the last 20 years have, for better or worse, been quite siloed out the type of intellectual property that they're creating. And they've always viewed it as a television program, as a film, as a game. And I think it's all of those things. And I think one of the greatest things about bringing people who have funded and have relationships in other sectors but are adjoined is that cross-promotion, is being able to sit with a company and say, this is a great piece of IP, this is a great franchise, forget about it being a game, what is it really? It's something that a consumer will like, and we as an investor or investors understand a different piece of the market and can help you access that. So not only do we bring capital and experience, we also bring access to a whole nother market, whether that be in film or television, books, music, publishing, a whole raft of different areas that actually complement perfectly what you're already doing in your businesses, but probably don't have the relationships or the time to think about. So what we're doing is we're able to come and say, yeah, we think this is a good investment opportunity. And by the way, we think it's a good investment opportunity because we think we can help build your company up in many areas that you never thought you could.
Thing to add to that?
No, no.
I kind of just touched on this, but obviously there's a lot of similarities between film and games, but there's also historically been quite a lot of difference in how the funds are structured. And it'd be just if you could talk a bit about kind of how film finance has typically structured things and how you're applying that into games, and particularly the sort of thing that might be different or worth sort of highlighting.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, it tended to be project-based, and the way in which someone would typically approach a film transaction or a film project would be to look at the collateral that's available in that. Look at what might have value, and to what extent that was a certainty. And trying to establish the certainty of certain aspects of the collateral, say a tax credit, was actually relatively straightforward. Pre-sale contracts, so this is where a film at the concept stage is sold to a distributor who would, when the film is completed, put it out in the cinema. So a savvy film producer would negotiate these pre-sales and a number of pre-sales on their project in order to then approach a bank who would then lend them the money against that pre-sale contract. So effectively, this enabled film producers to raise, in some cases, quite substantial amounts of money secured against their tax credit and pre-sale contracts. This sort of arrangement, obviously we have tax credit arrangements in games, not so much pre-sale contracts. I know that's into games, but the way in which the distribution network works is that each territory around the world would have its own set of distributors. So rather than going to one publisher who would cover the whole world, you would go to a series of different distributors, some in Australia, some in the UK, Germany, and so on. So you would need to have quite good relationships with a whole range of different distributors based all over the world. And this is where the role of a sales agent would generally come in, which is an organization that would have all of these relationships with distributors all over the world. So it would be important for a film fund to basically have good relationships with both the distributors and the sales agents in order to negotiate those pre-sale contracts. So typically that would be, in some cases, you could get up to 70% of the budget of a film would be secured against the pre-sales and tax credits. And then the remainder would be equity, which typically would come from, say, an EIS arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, independent film financing, which I suppose is probably the best analogy to draw here, is hugely complicated. And there are not only many different moving pieces and a number of bits of the jigsaw you have to piece together when you're putting together your finance. The monetization model, where those revenues come from, how they're collected, who's responsible for paying them, are huge and complicated and require a huge amount not only of diligence but also legwork in collecting those revenues. And I think what, certainly from an Ingenious perspective, we're finding particularly refreshing about the games industry is those monetization models are a lot more straightforward. There's a much simpler revenue stream. You can understand it. You're dealing with counterparties like Apple and Google. You can understand those revenue streams very clearly. I think one of the things that's probably frustrating us the most is how expensive the publishing community is and how much they charge in comparison to, say, film and television, where you've got models of between, say, 5 and 25%. We all know how expensive publishers can be on the game side. So I think we're interested by how the model has thus far developed in games, and we hope by coming into it, we're able, in many areas, to disrupt what's happening and be able to create an environment in which we can coexist with publishers, with developers, and actually, probably in many ways, place slightly more power back in the hands of the developer in this relationship and build out their models and their businesses. And I think as more film finances come into the market, they're probably going to be able to upset that apple cart a little more.
I mean, I'd just like to add, because I actually had 6 months on the tech venture side, and then I went into films, and then I came kind of back. And so it was quite kind of like intriguing to me, because when I talked about equity previously, I was talking about proper equity investment into the underlying company, and so I helped on kind of 2 deals early stage with that. But then I came to the film world, and equity is almost at the bottom of the waterfall, and it's viewed as bad, or kind of as soft money, as it were. That with this SPV structure, as Adam has kind of outlined, that you would be kind of last on this waterfall of money kind of trickling down. And so it's great that kind of now we're coming back and we're properly investing into, it isn't, again, short term. You don't have these, at least for us, we're not looking at the project financing, but we're actually looking in the team. And we've got 2 gaming investments previously under a previous strategy of tech ventures. We kind of one business, there's a great game, but the team itself wasn't great, as in it was there was some kind of there was dysfunction, and ultimately it ended up being liquidated, put out some great games. So, and then the other one is called Outplay. They're up in Scotland doing very well, and that, as in great founders. And so for us, it's really a team bet as to, okay, what are the founders, what's their track record, what is their vision for that game, how is it unique within the market? And so yes, for us, it's having that commercial analysis to both the creative, but then also the financial structuring to enable business to scale. So I think that we're very well placed to do that.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, right. I've got plenty, don't worry. So can you talk a bit about what you look for when developers approach you? In particular, what should they understand, and is there areas that you may focus on more or differently to finances that they may be more used to?
Sure. So it's probably fair to say we go 50-50. 50 company, 50 games. So we spend a huge amount of our time analysing the management team. And everyone always says that. What does that basically mean? Effectively means, can we work with this management team for a minimum of 5 years? Do they have something that is special and unique? Do they have an element within their business plan that we think is going to enable us to scale that business substantially over that 5-year period? So when we're looking at a management team, we're really thinking, right, here's a business plan. It's going to look like a hockey stick. I don't think I've ever seen a business plan that doesn't look like a hockey stick. Can they deliver on that hockey stick? Can they actually deliver on it? Do they have the right wherewithal? Is the underlying strategy there? Do they have the route to market? Do they know what? And what we want to know is where are there deficiencies in their business plan? Where do we think we can add significant value so as to keep on that natural trajectory? So I think on the team side, hugely important to us. And for me, it comes down to a spark. It comes down to the people. And if you don't think you can work with them for a long period of time, then it's not going to work. Secondly, it's the game itself or the games themselves. I really want to see a portfolio. From a VT perspective, I'm not only diversifying across a portfolio of companies, I'm diversifying across a portfolio of games. So if I don't feel that the games that they're developing are sufficiently robust, and we don't think that there's an X factor to those games, then I think the long and short of it is we're not going to end up investing. And we do a huge amount of research into the team that are developing those games, the underlying longevity of that particular game, the market as a whole, the data that sits behind it. So we'll probably spend at least 50% of our time analysing that as well. But broadly speaking, for me, it's down to the team and obviously down to the games that they're developing.
I mean, just like to kind of echo that, it's the case of, okay, the founders are, again, going to be there for the next at least kind of 5 years or until the company kind of wraps up. And it's, okay, we're investing into people. What is their rationale for this product? Because if they're just kind of there for a salary, if they're just kind of doing it to were the cogs, then will they stick with this company? Is it is it a passion of theirs? Because if they actually love their company, if they love the product they're producing, therefore they're going to stick through thick and thin. And with startups, it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And for us, it's about kind of having that founder who who sticks with it, who believes in their vision. And essentially, like for us, we're looking for founders who kind of scare us a little bit, because if there's a really interesting or unique opportunity, then kind of one has to question, okay, why hasn't anybody else done that? And so you kind of have to have half people thinking that you're genius, and then half people thinking that you're really stupid. Why are you going into the sector? And so it's having that kind of either unique content or having a track record within a competitive space that means that you are the best and you will kind of, again, have that X factor.
And I think just to add to that, also, as well as equity financing, I mentioned earlier on debt financing, so where companies will effectively lend money secured against certain pieces of collateral in your business, that film organizations are often very versed in this type of financing as well. So, and in fact, that might be their preference. In the film industry, you've kind of typically got two groups of financiers, some equity, some who focus on debt. So maybe do a bit of research before you approach the film fund to make sure you're approaching one that does the bit that you want. And if it is a debt financier that you're speaking to, maybe have a look at, what collateral you have available on your balance sheet. What kind of tax credit do you expect to get? What are your ad revenues looking like from Google, Facebook, and so on? What's going on at the App Store? Have you just received a statement and you've got to wait, however many days it is to draw those funds down, but you actually could really do with it now in order to boost your UA. So just have a think about what type of fund it is that you're actually about to speak to before going in and pitching to them.
I mean, yeah, just like to add to that, as in that's a great positive signal for us because, as in games by their very nature are kind of recreational, and therefore it's about having a product that everyone enjoys, but at the same time there has to be some underlying steel to it where you have a founder who has this amazing vision that they kind of really enjoy this game and it's a fantastic game, but then at the same time is aware of the business element, the commercial acumen, and having an idea, okay, yeah, there's this unique gap in the market and we're going to exploit that. Yes, the game's going to be fantastic, but it's not to kind of lose the forest for the trees, etc. And for them to still have a vision for the next kind of what we're in it for with you.
Okay. Can we talk a bit about forecasting and your expectations and kind of what you expect to see when people give you a forecast and how you deal with that and how you kind of drill down into that detail?
I mean, I can just add to that. The one guarantee about any business plan is that you're not going to keep to it. At the same time, it's very useful for us to understand what assumptions underlie your business model. And so, again, it's more of a signaling perspective that, as in we're happy even with people that we only met 1-2 times to actually chat about your finances. Okay, is this a realistic assumption if you're going to have a CPI of this and the LTV is going to be this? Do you really think that's realistic? Do you have to change some sort of kind of monetization strategy that in order to achieve that goal? And so I think that for us it's useful as to think more about what you're thinking about. Where is this game going? Do you think that it can be kind of multi-million dollar or pound revenue generator, but then also for us to kind of like stress test it and say, okay, you've presented this model, and we present our model where we slightly adjusted some assumptions. How does this change your view on things? So it's not a tick box exercise. It's more of a discussion, at least for me and for us.
And I think from our perspective, effectively, what we're going to do is take a business plan. Top to bottom, we'll look at every assumption that's been made from resourcing, operational overhead, the assumptions you're making around particular KPIs that you need to achieve to make a successful outcome based on that hockey stick I was talking about earlier. And effectively, we're going to look at that, we're going to discount it, we're going to stress test it, and we're going to see whether when we've done all of those things, it still makes for an interesting business plan. So look, I think it's a collaborative process. Effectively, when people come to us with an opportunity, we're going to look at it, we're going to analyze all the things I discussed earlier, and then we're going to sit down with you and work to pull that business plan apart and put it back together again. But if the key fundamentals are there, you're a great management team, you have a proven track record, or if you don't have a proven track record, you've got something that's so special that we really want to build. Effectively, we're going to rip that business plan up, we're going to come up with one that we think makes sense, and we're going to still help you on your journey. So the business plan for me is about getting you in the door. It's about demonstrating to us why you think it's a great opportunity, and then it's about working with us to demonstrate how we can work together to build what you think is a great company. So when it comes to business plans, I mean, they are just one element to our overall analysis. I feel like, yeah, business plan for a company, there's, you know, it's very, very difficult to do. I think from my perspective, it's about demonstrating to us that you have a real depth of understanding of your particular game, where it fits in the market, who the competitors are, why you think you can look up to and replicate what someone has done in that market, and why we should believe you. And then it's about figuring out what we think those underlying assumptions should be based on that.
Would it help to just mention how some film funds would traditionally look at forecasting, just so that people have an understanding? Because the VC approach that was just being described is going to be relatively new to some of these film funds. Now, bear in mind, they still do have very deep pockets and are probably therefore quite well worth speaking to. They would traditionally, as I said, look at things on a project basis. And that would involve, as I mentioned earlier, them having discussions with a sales agent who they would find a sort of reliable, reputable organization, and potentially distributors that are interested in that particular project. And this would typically involve looking at the sales estimates that the sales agent produces and comparing that to the amounts that certain distributors might be prepared to offer as a pre-sale at this kind of early inception stage of the project, and then potentially discount, and in fact usually discount, the sales agent's sales estimates, and then based on those estimates they will then potentially make an offer to the project. So I'm just sort of mentioning that is the typical way in which a film financier, and I'm sort of skipping over a lot of details, would approach the project-based financing arrangements. So just bear in mind when you approach them that might be the way in which they are trying to look at your project. But because, you know, what we are talking about here is the more conventional VC style of assessing a project and investing in a long-term business, that they might need a little bit of help in getting as clear as they can on what the opportunity is that you're presenting to them.
And I think more importantly, identifying where those sources of revenue are going to come from, what off the tops are going to be, because I think, as I was saying earlier, those revenue streams are extremely complicated in film. They are done on a territory by territory basis. There's a lot that goes into it. So therefore their assessment of the sales agent who ultimately sells to those territories and the estimates they provide are what they hinge on. You don't have that in the game sector, so therefore what they're going to be very interested in is understanding the relationship you have with the market, whether that be through a publisher or whether that be through a self-publishing model. And you're going to have to explain to them why you believe you think that those revenue streams are likely to happen, because they're not going to have those same estimates. So they're going to really have to get comfortable with that route to market. And to start with, I can well imagine that a lot of the film funds that are coming into the market will inevitably look at that publishing relationship. So they'll probably expect you to have a publishing partner because that's the model that they're used to in film.
So for each of you, what areas are you specifically interested in right now? Like, what sort of companies, games, teams are you looking to invest in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can go first, but I mean, for me, I maintain a kind of level of mental plasticity about kind of what areas one invest in, because ultimately I'm a financier, you're an entrepreneur, and you're more likely to know more about your market than I am. But in terms of like interesting sectors, I think it actually very relevant for this talk, that IP, as I mentioned before, is more fungible than ever, and that there is within the film and the TV sector that there is a kind of a slow recognition that if you actually and the licensing fees, that you can kind of make ancillary and extra revenues on top of the original IP within the game sector. And so I think there's an exciting opportunity to have more interactive games and also kind of licensed games within that space. And then kind of in terms of like talking about kind of new platforms, quite interested in say like kind of AR. VR is, I would love VR to be a great investment because I love actually interacting with it as a recreational user, but the consumer play isn't there. AR as a tool at the moment is far more viable to talk kind of money. But I think that there are lots of kind of exciting gamification plays through AR, not necessarily only to single games, but then also to kind of other verticals. And so it's really exciting to see games be used for, say, kind of actually more specific advertising for kind of the application of the Pokemon Go model, but to kind of different areas in order to generate, for example, further footfall. I think it was Snatch. Which is that they raised around 4 million a while back. They were doing that for kind of like businesses in order to get people to come to their like coffee shop. They used to have kind of AR pointers, and they're doing kind of all of these events. And I think although we say, okay, this is the games industry is slowly starting to grow and grow in of itself, but then also into other industries. And so yeah, I'm excited about that.
And I think from Ingenious' perspective, we're looking for probably 3 different types of investment opportunities. One is working with publishers who are looking to develop their own content. We see publishers more and more looking to drive traffic into their pipeline. I think it's fair to say it's a pretty competitive market, and therefore a lot of the publishers we're talking to are very keen to launch their own studios, to develop their own content and use that route to market to capitalize on that. So that's the first thing. Second thing is just, great studios. Effectively, we're looking to invest between £250,000 and £5 million per company. We can invest a maximum under the enterprise investment scheme of £12 million over a 3-year period. So we've got scope to really scale studios that we think have got the right games and portfolio of games that we're looking for. And the third area is looking at IP, so traditional IP that we may introduce to studios through our relationships on the film and television side. So again, getting back to my point, franchises, looking at that franchise potential for a specific piece of IP is how can we take that and games on top of it. So studios that we think have got access to strong licenses or have great IP that needs exploiting in other areas like film and television are a real sweet spot for us as well. So they're probably the 3 main areas we're looking to invest in over the next year.
And just, I'd also mention that in a number of pitches that we're seeing recently, I mean, if we broadly split them into premium-based games or service-based games, that at the moment where games as a service is really a big area of interest, and in the premium-based models, what's sometimes interesting to see and people often don't mention is what aspects of their business in the longer term may be adaptable to service-based arrangements. Because when they're not mentioned at the moment, and we might be wrong here, but our projections are that games as a service is going to continue growing, and the premium games sector is going to gradually shrink in comparison. So what we would like to see is some understanding of how the business, as I said, might adapt into service-based model in future.
And I'd just like to also add, again, relating to film funds, in terms of how there might be kind of similarities, like in terms of a film actually doing well, either it's or the cast underlying that film or the genre or the specific script within that genre is kind of like first in class. And so for us, it's about thinking about, okay, where can your company win? Can it win on, yes, it's, again, I've said this before, yes, it's a really competitive market, but your team is amazing and the vision is great, and we think that it's going to have fantastic unit economics. But then the reason why I was talking about AR and kind of another example is voice. Where can you exploit gaps in the market? There are new platforms, massive penetration of like smart speakers, for example, and also esports in terms of user adoption versus monetization. Where can a company kind of grow most effectively? Is it kind of, again, to use an analogy of, say, to use plants, like say, are you going to be in the rainforest and therefore you're going to be got to be a very strong tree to drive up through the canopy, or are you going to kind of take a punt in a kind of new field where there's kind of lots of sunlight, but then you've got to really kind of grow it yourself and go it alone, and that's what we're really excited about.
Okay. Any questions? Right, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thank you.